We're going to talk about Onkelos today, Mirza Shem. Onkelos ben Klonimus, the famous author of the Targum, the translation of the Chumash, perhaps other Sfarim too, but certainly the Chumash into Aramaic. And of course, it's more than just a translation. It's like Rashi, it's a bridge between the written Torah and the oral Torah. Onkelos added little nuances and words and explanations subtly along with the text, and he provided a running commentary in a way to the Chumash. It was so important that until at least 1,000 years ago, they would intersperse the reading of the Torah on Shabbos mornings in shul, a few psukim, a number of psukim, a parsha with of the text of the Torah itself, and then a matargim would recite Onkelos. Usually it was Onkelos, his commentary / translation, so that everybody who spoke Aramaic primarily would have a translation, would know what was going on. Interestingly enough, Rav Hirsch in Frankfurt 150 years ago wrote a letter to his uncle, who bitterly complained that Rav Hirsch was now saying a drasha on Shabbos morning in German rather than Yiddish, and he felt that was the first step towards reform. And Rav Hirsch answered politely but forcefully that if he had his way, he'd actually have a matargim in German on Shabbos mornings in shul, so at least people would understand what the Torah is about. So we don't do that. Rav Hirsch didn't do that. He didn't get his way in everything. But nonetheless, Onkelos was seen as absolutely the appropriate translation and commentary to intersperse with the reading of the Torah. Now this is remarkable for a number of reasons. One is that Onkelos himself, as I'm sure you know, was a ger. He was a convert. So he wasn't born into a Jewish community. He didn't go to regular Jewish schools, if it would have been a school, or he didn't have a regular Jewish tutor. Probably he was a young adult, maybe even an older adult, when he became Jewish and started learning Torah seriously. And to reach the level of a teacher of Chumash to all the entire Jewish nation for all generations, to reach that level despite such a late start and such a serious disadvantage is astounding. He also was he's famous for his commentary, but his translation. But there was a lot of other activity that he engaged in through his life. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah tells us that he seems to have been an executor of the will of Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel was Nasi. He was the descendant of David HaMelech, and certainly the in many ways the political leader, and certainly the Torah leader of the Jews in his generation. And Onkelos, upon Rabban Gamliel's death, was the one who oversaw how at least part of the Rabban Gamliel's household would be arranged and dispersed. But what we're going to focus on today is the Gemara in Avodah Zarah and Daf Yud Aleph Hamad Aleph, which describes a famous story, 3 famous stories, of the Romans, rather resentful that their favorite son had become a Jew, sent 3 different contingents, 3 units of soldiers to bring him back in one way or the other, I suppose. This was not uncommon. There were Romans in the late Beis HaMikdash period and the early period after the Beis HaMikdash destruction. There were Romans who converted to Judaism and lahavdil to other religions also. It wasn't unusual for especially wealthy and educated Romans to be thinking about their place in the world and their relationship to God or gods or goddesses or whatever they might choose. This did happen, and as we know, a great many participants in various religions, Judaism among them, were persecuted and often slaughtered by Romans for the privilege. So Onkelos was, especially since he seems to have been a prominent Roman, was pursued. So this, you know the story, but let's look at this precisely the chain of events. These 3 contingents of soldiers sent after Onkelos and what happened to them, and we may see something of the way that Onkelos himself saw his relationship with God and why he was such an incredibly powerful person. And along the way, we can learn, I think, a great deal about why God is such an incredibly powerful God, and why it's certainly in our interest and to our great pleasure to be servants of God. So let's take a look at the first of the 3 stories, the shortest of them. Onkelos bar Klonimus Igayer. Onkelos, the son of Klonimus, became a ger. Shodar Kisar Gunda De Roimoy Abasre, the Caesar, sent a unit of Roman soldiers, presumably Roman soldiers. Rashi says a gunda is a gudud, which is a small unit of soldiers who might infiltrate foreign territory and steal and kill. So this was a unit of Roman soldiers he sent to Basra after Onkelos, Mashkinuhu Bikroi, and Onkelos drew them, he attracted them with psukim, with passages from the Torah itself, Igayor, and they were all Megayer themselves. They became Jews. Now think about this for a minute. The Roman soldiers, by and large, were probably illiterate, and they'd been trained from a young age to do nothing but kill, and along the way maim and pillage if there was time, but certainly their primary occupation was killing. They were rough men, most likely, and not given to spiritual thoughts and philosophical debate, and they were under the fear of their commanders. If they would rebel, mutiny from under their military commanders, and certainly from under orders of the Caesar, they could expect to be killed. And they had no interest, by and large. When they get up in the morning, these guys probably weren't thinking about changing religions and giving up their relationship with their commanders. So, and they weren't of that philosophical disposition, even if they did think about such things. What could Onkelos possibly have said to them to make them change their whole worldview and take such an enormous risk just because they had a conversation? Just because he quoted some psukim? I don't know what psukim he quoted, although we may have an inkling from the next two stories, but I don't know exactly which psukim he quoted, but I'm fairly confident that I could quote the very same psukim and have much less of an effect. So let's see at any rate if we can figure out a little bit of what his method was, and we can use it on ourselves. Maybe we'll make ourselves a bit Jewish. Let's see the second story. Hadar Shadar Gunda de Roimoy Achrina Abasre. So the Caesar then sent a second unit of soldiers after Onkelos, and presumably after the first gang. Omar Lahu, but he said to them before they left, Loitain Rulei v'loi midi. Don't say a word to him. Obviously this fellow is good with his mouth, and don't say a word to him. Don't get into conversations. Ki havu shaklu, when they took him, they came to his house presumably, and they maybe put him in chains, I don't know. They took him out. Va'azlu, they were taking him out of his house and heading back to, I guess, Rome. Omar Luhu, he said to them, this Onkelos said to the soldiers, Emelachu milsa ba'alma? I'll tell you something just in general. No Torah, chas v'shalom, I wouldn't teach you a word of Torah. I know you're not allowed to listen to my Torah. Well, let me just tell you something in general. Nipiora naket noira kemei pipiora. Nipiora was an official in the Roman hierarchy. He was apparently some government official, maybe a military official. But he would sometimes, part of his duties was to carry a torch to light the way for the person above him in the hierarchy, the Pipiyora. Pipiyora leduchsa, Pipiyora, one of his tasks was to carry a torch in honor of and to light the way for the duchsa, who was a step above him. Duchsa hegmoina, the duchsa would carry for the hegmoin. And the hegmoin we know was like a military governor. The Gemara talks about the hegmoin, and Gemara Ksubas talks about the hegmoin and the fun he used to get into messing around with Jewish marriages. So the hegmoin was a feared governor. Oddly enough, though, he was a military governor under the Greek rule. I suppose they were still using the same names when it came time for Roman rule. At any rate, hegmoin l'kaima, and the hegmoin, his part of his task was to carry the torch for the kaima. Kaima minaket noira nikmei inshi. Now the kaima, the highest level in the hierarchy, did he carry the flame for anyone? Amrilei lei. The soldier said no. The kaima, he's on top. He doesn't have to carry a flame. He doesn't have to carry a torch for anybody. He takes care of himself. Amar luhu. So Onkelos said to them, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, naket noira kemei Yisrael. Hashem, he actually carries a torch for the Jews. Dichsiv Hashem hoylech lefneim yoimam, that Hashem went before them by day and by night. When? In the Midbar, in the 40 years in the wilderness, when Hashem guided us with an Amud Eish and an Amud Anan, with a pillar of fire or pillar of smoke, of cloud, to protect us and guide us. So Hashem is different than the Kaima. The Kaima, maybe he takes care of himself exclusively, but the But Hashem, he takes care of, well, there's nobody above Hashem he could take care of. He could light a fire or light a torch for. He even takes care of those far, far beneath him. Igayor kulahu. They all became gerim. So says the Gemara. Now what was so impressive about this little analogy that Onkelos spun, this story that he spun? What was so remarkable about this aspect of the way Hashem deals with the world? So I think it's worthwhile to talk a little bit about ancient religions. Before, as far as I know, and I'm not an expert in all religions, but before Judaism, I don't believe the pagan religions that existed were effectively moral systems. I don't believe they taught that human beings should act in a way that's moral. They taught that human beings might find it in their interest to respect and honor their gods, because otherwise their gods might zap them with lightning bolts, or take their wives, or take their children, or take them. So there was in a person's interest to keep a low profile, not to wear purple. In the Greek mythology, a human being shouldn't wear purple because that appears that he's encroaching on the glory that is due really only to the gods. So you keep a low profile, don't make eye contact with the gods, don't get involved, but don't look to them as role models. In much of pagan mythology, the gods are portrayed as being jealous and lustful and violent and hot-tempered, and not really being people or images that we should have as role models. And I believe it's fair to say that pagan religions do not claim, or did not claim, to be effectively moral, and therefore the societies that encompass them would be societies that wouldn't necessarily be moral. People might not steal, but not because it's wrong to steal, but because you may get caught and beaten up. And they may not murder, and they may not cheat, and they may not lie, but not necessarily for moral reasons. That's the way I understand it. Even I have it on good authority that the Hindus, modern Hindus, while they're probably a very decent bunch and a trustworthy bunch, I would imagine, but my understanding is they don't steal. But it's not because they consider it immoral to steal, it's because they consider theft to desire for other people's property to stand in the way of their goal of eliminating their sense of self and their sense of worth. They want to become excessively humble, and wanting somebody else's property is unthinkable. They don't even want their own property. But it's not a moral statement or a moral position. Okay, so the world before Judaism, I think it's fair to say, was a lonely place, a cold place, where the gods don't care about you, and they can become violent with no provocation at all. And probably people didn't necessarily care all that much about each other. And societies weren't built for each other. There was no perception of a government for the people. And there was no idea that kings would, if necessary, create a welfare net to catch people who temporarily find themselves unable to support themselves. There was no Medicare in the ancient world. So there's some debate today politically whether there should be a Medicare today, but that's not my job, and it's way above my pay scale to have an opinion on that one. But certainly in the ancient world, the government didn't take care of you. You took care of the government. They taxed you when they wanted money, and they ignored you the rest of the time. So now, these Roman soldiers would have lived in such a world, and now they're shown a God who not only provides light, let's say that's an analogy for chokhmah, for wisdom, for his people by giving us the Torah, but he actually protects them and actually guides them. He's a role model and a moral guide, and you could it's not a big jump to suggest that a society brought up with a faith in such a God is going to be a happier place, one hopes, is going to be a more moral place, and it's a safer place. That was apparently attractive. It was a revolutionary idea, but it was apparently attractive, and it got them going.